All right. Well, welcome to another Afterthoughts. This is the last one of our Fear Less series. It's been an encouraging series to me. Not all the time do you get as much feedback, and I think this happens over time in lots of churches. I remember, when Larry was here and I first started at the church. He's an excellent speaker. He really is, and lots of people really like how he speaks. But like I never felt the need to encourage him because it was consistent, right? It was good.
Sure.
And so over time you kind of forget to go,
Right.
hey, that was actually really impactful to me because every week has been impactful, right? So you get into the routine of that you get used to it.
Yeah.
And so I've experienced that a little bit over in this since I've started now, in 2020. So this will be 4 years this June in this role. And I've experienced some waves of that, of, getting used to Lee speaking all the time. And so I used to get lots of compliments at the start because it was new and fresh and good for you. And we want to encourage you. And then you get into the routine of speaking. And it was almost like it was even a bigger affirmation to not get the constant affirmation.
Right.
I don't know how to explain that because I'm not trying to fish for compliments. It was really, I liked that I got to get into that rhythm.
Yeah.
But with this series, every week, I have multiple people coming up. And it's not because it's like a new and fresh way of speaking or the speaker is different.
Sure.
It's the topic. Has really resonated a lot. And even with what Aiden had shared last week, really resonated with people. Like they just, he's a great speaker, did a great job. Man, was that ever practical. And I think, when we find topics of discussion, when we dig into the word, when we get to know God at a deeper level, get to know ourselves at a deeper level, and then wrestle through really what we talk about a lot is this is really transformation stuff of how do we transform our lives that have fear in them and how do we walk in freedom. And there's something about that just, again, it really resonated with our church. So on one hand, I kind of grieve that this is the last one. But at the same time, I think it was good. And to go longer is to almost beleaguer the point. Like it stops making it worth it. I don't know how else to, you know what I mean? Like you end while it's good, kind of.
Yeah. So. Let the fondness feeling be there.
Yeah. So, and it's funny that we talk about how good it is when we're talking about fear all the time and anxiety and worry. And hasn't that been great to dig into those things? Seems like a weird thing. But when you think back to all of the sermons, Kaylee, like that we've done and the different topics that we've done, everything from knowing fear to knowing God, to trustworthiness, knowing that we can trust him, surrendering our fear, surrendering our lives to him, and then even wholeness of what Aiden talked about last week. What has stood out to you kind of in all of them? Like what's one thing in our discussions or in the sermons themselves that really has kind of resonated with you or stood out to you? And I didn't prep you with the question because in some ways it's like I kind of want your gut answer, like what your gut answer would be. And I know you like to prep
immediately the beads on my forehead
I know,
start.
And there's not a wrong answer here.
Thank you.
So like if it's like you say this and then later on you're like, wait, that's not what resonated. This did. That's fine. Change your mind. But what's your gut answer?
The real selfish gut answer is, it was a really affirming series for me personally because it was testimony of my growth in this.
Oh, that's so great.
Do you know what I mean? Where you go like, oh,
that's really great.
Cool. I don't feel that kind of worry or that kind of fear, or, oh, that was something I totally dealt with here. Look at what Jesus did to redeem that.
I think we underestimate how important that is. Like we often look, I think, at sermons as this is where I come to be beat up. Like I remember, I don't know who said, it was one of our pastors, whether it was Dustin or Aiden or myself or Jack or somebody lately in the last couple of years, had a response of just saying, I just love it when you preach because you just beat me up the whole time. And it was a compliment of like the idea that the sermon is supposed to somehow always be at the nicest term, challenge.
Sure. Right?
The worst term is an absolute soul beating of, like that's where we change, and we have to almost suffer when we're listening to the sermon in order to change. And I go, sometimes I think sermons are supposed to actually affirm belief and like for us to actually almost be witnesses of testimony in our own lives of, man, God has really worked on me in that. Like there has been growth.
Yeah.
And man, I am found freedom in that. Like you preach that. That's true. Someone needs to hear that. I have testimony of that's true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we don't get excited about that as much as I think sometimes we should. Like we almost, like I say, we get into the sermons have to always be for everybody the soul crushing or soul conflicting or and again or at the very best always a challenge for growth. And I guess we can always grow. It's not like we're ever perfect, but man, do we ever undersell affirmation and testimony of God's goodness?
It's wild because I've never thought of sermons in that context. I've never felt like sermons are that. So I'm like, oh, maybe I have a big ego. But like, but I've always felt like
that's funny,
right? I mean, when we read in scripture about the edification of the body, like edification means edification,
right?
It doesn't, like.
Build
anyways,
it
up. So like I my favorite sermons are the ones where I want to yell back like, yeah, in the middle of it, but I don't.
Right.
Like those are the ones that grab you.
You could yell. I could give you permission to do so.
Thanks.
I'm just curious if you ever would.
No.
Never. I would.
I do sometimes like yip, but it has to be when the kids are in the room. Then it feels like then they get excited, so you can get away with it.
Like you yip with kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
That's fine. Okay. So what I thought, because this sermon it's really just the recap of everything and really kind of then wrestling through like what is the ramification. And again, I talked with our seniors on a different topic on our Thursday God's Story, My Story a couple weeks ago. Just I love how Paul, in how he writes Pauline epistles, for instance, in all of the letters that we read in the New Testament, he always starts with truth and then he goes to application. And he kind of follows this pattern in how he talks. Romans would even be a great example of like, again, all of this kind of like foundational truth. And now this is why that matters. And I like that thought. And I find myself in my preaching, I often preach like that of like, here's truth. Now here's why that matters.
Right.
As almost a default. And so I found myself, even as I put this series together, that's kind of how the series landed of we talked about some foundational truth at the beginning.
Sure.
And then we landed into the practical. This is how you experience that. So on Sunday, just wanted to kind of wrap all that up again and go like all of this is in a cohort together to walk in freedom. Like one is not the thing. It's like, it's all of those things in process. So I thought today I had 5 questions, which is way more than we normally do. So we're not going to spend a lot of time answering the questions for you, but I'm just going to read them off, pause the video as you guys need to just sit and discuss. You may not even get through all 5.
Sure.
And I think especially for those that are doing this as small group, you might find that the first 3 questions are more than long enough and you're done. Put the other 2 in your back pocket for another time maybe, or just think about them on your own. But first one was just knowing the difference between healthy fear and unhealthy fear, I think is really important. So how do you discern between healthy caution and paralyzing fear in your life? So just share some examples with your group. So the second question, it really comes from the second sermon too, and they're kind of in that order. Some people see God as the tyrant in the sky, or at the other end of the spectrum, the buddy wanting to grant our every whim. So reflecting on the concept of fearing the Lord, or fear of the Lord, what does it mean to cultivate a healthy fear of God in our daily lives? This one to me, I wanted to just do a quick response before everyone pauses on that, because again, I think sometimes when we talk about the fear of the Lord, if we have an unhealthy view of fear, and I really do mean kind of like everything's in that paralyzing fear, or fear is as the negative as it can be, and not the healthy cautionary fear, or like respecting the power of something, right? Like I think it's okay to get, I have a healthy fear of walking into an electrical grid area.
Sure.
I don't know enough about it to just walk willy-nilly in there.
Yeah.
Because there's death awaiting if I go to touch the wrong thing, right? Like that, so that's a healthy fear. There's nothing negative about that. So understanding the power of something is to have a fear of that, a healthy fear of that. Yeah. So if as you're watching and as you're talking as a group and the fear of the Lord is a difficult concept, it might actually be at the root of what do you mean by fear? Is it unhealthy or is it healthy? And so that might be even something to talk about when you talk about, what does it look like to cultivate that healthy fear is actually recognizing that the way I see God or view God actually could be kind of influencing how I fear the Lord. Yeah. He's the tyrant or he's the buddy or you know what I mean? Yeah. So. The third sermon is that we know God is trustworthy. We know that he's in control of all things. So how have you trusted in God amidst your own fears and uncertainties? Talk about this is where all of us live, is in fears and uncertainties.
And pretty consistently and for all your days.
Yeah. That you don't, I don't know if you ever get over that because it's just a new season of uncertainty and,
unknown. Yeah.
Unknowns. Bree and I are in the season of, our kids are on the verge of all leaving home and becoming independent, like the empty nest thing. Within, 2 years, next year, potentially, we could have just Levi at home. Like just 3 of us out of 6. Wow. Like that. Yeah. That's crazy. So there's a lot of uncertainty. What's that going to look like? What's our rhythm going to be? Does anyone want to come back and hang out with their parents? Like,
please come back. Please come back
and visit. Yeah. And at the same time, I have the fear of what if they come back and don't leave again?
Right.
Because I don't want them to live in my house anymore. So there's the uncertainties of the future. Yeah. I want it all. So anyway, I think you're right in saying that this is just lifelong. And so in our different seasons, we've had different uncertainties and fears that pop up. And so how does trusting in God that he has a plan, that he can hold us, that he is trustworthy and true, how is that kind of built a trust, and how have we handed over our trust to him? So because we trust him, we can discuss the significance then of surrendering our fears to God's control. And I think a good example of this is Jesus at Gethsemane. And so how do we practically surrender our anxieties and our worries to God, and then finding peace in his sovereign plan, trusting that he has a plan for us, but knowing that we have the free will to make all of those decisions every day. So this it's almost like there's not a tension. It's just a combination of partnering with God and trusting that he is leading us in the plan that he has for us. When you think of surrender and surrendering to God, what's a practice that you would have? Or you think that even as you think about I'm going to surrender this to God, and I think I know your answer already, so that's kind of why I'm asking. Oh. So let me see if I'm right in my head.
Okay.
How do you surrender things to God? What's your practice in doing that?
Yeah, mine would be prayer. You got it. Yeah, I really enjoy starting my day really with that, and in the sense of whether it's the big things or the little things, that's very much, I'm a journaler. I do that a lot, and I find it really when I take ownership of surrendering, right? Like when I choose to make the surrender choice and go, hey, God, I'm in front of you. I'm me, you're you. I trust that. I know that. I'm aligning myself with that. So in light of that, I praise you for this,
Mm-hmm.
and I ask you for this, and I give you this because I don't know what to do with it. You know, it's basically what every morning looks like by
That's so
myself
great. That's so
before
great.
my family wakes up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and because like again, your prayer warrior prayer is really important to you.
It's huge. Yeah.
And so that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, for me in surrender is I actually physically hold out my hands. I have to do something physically in order to surrender things. There's something about the physical connects to the actual that's going on in my spiritual or mental or whatever. But I have to physically kind of go, like, God, I surrender this, and I put my hands out and I go, here, giving it to you. And I find that when I'm just praying and I don't do that, I haven't done it. Like I actually have to do the actual physical handing over the whatever this thought or thing is. I have to almost physically hand it over.
That's awesome.
So anyway, there's lots of different ways to come into surrender. But
yeah, I find in a worship service setting too, like especially when it's a large group and you can kind of be a little unseen in it. I would find getting down on knees was that same kind of thing where it's like, and in that, even in that older traditional sense of like getting down where you're sitting and like facing the pew and just having a minute and just going, okay, Jesus, like I'm here. And
that's why I like those kneeling benches in Catholic churches
me too.
and other
They're so
other
rad.
places. I actually kind of sometimes wish we had kneeling benches for where we are, just because then you can kneel. You have the opportunity and it doesn't hurt your knees because it's padded.
Look for kneeling benches.
Look for kneeling benches in the future. And then last week, I think Aiden was so practical in his sermon of just, again, finding that wholeness then in Jesus. If we know who God is, we know that he is trustworthy, we surrender our things to him, now we're in a place to receive and receive from Jesus. And so, I mean, I love the practicality of like, it's in wholeness of your body, of your mind, and of your soul. Like what are you doing physically that is actually hurting you and giving you anxiety? Like what are you doing with your mind? What are you taking in that is adding to the anxiety? Like stop it. Like it kind of takes me back to the old Bob Newhart skit that he had where he was a psychiatrist. It was $5 for a psychiatry appointment. And the lady comes in and goes, I have a fear of I'm claustrophobic, a fear of spaces. And he's like, oh, okay, well, I can help you with that. Sit down. Give me your $5. He gives him the $5. And he's like, just stop it. Oh. And she's like, what? He's like, just stop being afraid of enclosed spaces. She's like, well, that's not really helpful. And the whole skit is really basically just him just like, just stop it. Stop. Why would you be afraid of that? There's nothing wrong with that. Just stop it. So anytime I talk to a psychiatrist or a counselor, I bring up Bob Newhart and stop it, and they all laugh because it just resonates. Okay. Sometimes it's as simple as I have a lot of anxiety because I drink way too much coffee. Stop it. Stop drinking all that coffee. Sometimes it's that simple, but sometimes it's really, really complicated. Yeah. Right. And so understanding again that there are some simple things that we can do to help. And that leads us into a place where we can start tackling the more complicated things. So it's just taking those little steps so that we can tackle the big thing, and whatever that might be. And sometimes it's a physical thing, sometimes it's a spiritual thing, sometimes it is a mental thing. But let's do the little things that at least set us up for success. Totally. Again, that's what I loved about that sermon, because it was just get so practical and a reminder of, you're right, like we're kind of our own worst enemy at times. Totally. Of doing the little things. Yeah. So
I think with that too, what I find encouraging is, or challenging both, and is when you, like, we all know for ourselves what the things are that we're not, be it physical, mental, spiritual, that we're like, yeah, that's not the best, right? We know them. We, hands down, we all know them.
That's right.
But sometimes we don't name them to trusted people. We don't like name them to our spouse. We don't name them to our close friends. We don't say, hey, we both know this is a thing that I don't do well. Right. Because it's obvious. With your close people, they know too. Yep. But once I know, even for Mark and I, like, freedom has come so much when we just name the things, like, hey, I am just going to bed way too late, or whatever it is. Right.
That's right.
I know it's not fun to like keep me on that, but could you just like gently say this at this time of the night and just help me own it, and not that it's their responsibility, but just that sense of like, if there's something within us that when we take ownership to admit it even just makes us own it more easily. right?
Well, it just invites people into partnering with you, right? And oftentimes it is the people closest to us that can do that well. They know us well. We're not designed to do life alone.
No.
We are designed to do it in community.
Yeah.
And so the people who are closest in our community are the very people that can walk with us in that.
Yeah.
And that's not a burden. That's actually a privilege.
Yeah. And
So-
the hope is that you would be met with obviously empathy
That's
and
right.
like encouragement.
That's right.
So choose wisely, but
That's right. So I would say if someone does come to you and says, "Hey, I need some help in this," or can you walk with me in this, or do you notice these things? I think that would be helpful. Walk with them as a privilege. Like it is a privilege to see people find freedom and success in different areas. It's exciting.
Yeah.
Right. So wholeness in Jesus is found in our physical, mental, and spiritual part of our lives. So what area do you need to make changes in to experience wholeness in Christ? And maybe it's just something very simple of, you know what, I've been going to bed too late, or, you know, I need to maybe make a change in my diet, or, you know what, I need to add a spiritual practice, right? I need to be praying more. I know that that's really helpful to me. So just name it within your group. Even as Kaylee just said, it's just a simple thing of just name it and find some accountability and step into some freedom of doing the good things that we know are good for us and lead us into wholeness in Christ. So just a quick summary. This is a little bit longer. I knew it was going to be longer because I had 5 questions. Again, you don't have to necessarily have gotten through all of them, but maybe you did. But here's kind of the summary of the whole package of, I think you have to know your fear. You got to know God. Then you can trust in God. Then you can surrender to God, which then leads you to wholeness found in Jesus. And it's then that we can walk in freedom. And it's not always a linear path, but sometimes it is. And so just understanding that that's a whole package. And if you're finding your difficulty in any one of those areas, you kind of go back a little bit of like, okay, well, I'm having a really hard time surrendering. Okay, well, how are you at trusting? Like, do you know you can trust him? Well, it's like, well, I don't know if I can trust him. Okay, well, then I think you need to get to know him more. Right. And so,
what's the precursor?
I don't even know if I want to know God. Okay, well, then what's your fear? Where are you afraid? And so, like, it just, to me, it made a kind of a logical sense of steps of just kind of leading into freedom. But it is all kind of leading into foundational truths of this is who God is and how he wants to walk with us in all areas of life. So it's been a privilege to walk through this. It's been helpful for me. And hopefully it has been helpful for others as we've journeyed together. So thanks for joining us.